The words slipped from his mouth with the ease of someone who had spoken them 1,000 times before. Bill Clinton, the man who once carried the weight of the Oval Office, leaned forward with a sly grin and let the jab fly. He dismissed Jasmine Crockett's legal career in a single, cutting remark, as if decades of study, courtroom battles, and tireless advocacy could be brushed away with a shrug and a smirk. The room froze. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. It's that casual arrogance, the practiced cadence of a man who had always believed his words were law. The audience shifted uncomfortably, some stunned into silence, others exchanging glances as if to ask, "Did he really just say that?" Crockett sat still, her eyes fixed on him, reading every ounce of condescension laced into his tone. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Clinton smirked again, as though he had scored the point, as though the crowd belonged to him, as though she was merely a guest at his table. This was not a clash of ideas. This was not even about policy. This was a collision of eras, the old guard against the new wave. The insider who had played politics like a chessboard for decades against the outsider who had fought her way into the room, without permission slips or backroom deals. And in that silence, every immigrant family who had ever been told their sacrifice was not enough. Every young woman of color dismissed by men in power. Every fighter underestimated by polished elites. They all felt the sting of Clinton's remark. It was bigger than Crockett. It was about them. The cameras caught it all. The smirk, the pause, the dagger dressed as a joke. For a moment, it seemed like the insult would hang unanswered, like history would repeat itself with another powerful man belittling another rising woman, leaving the crowd to nod politely and move on. But Jasmine Crockett was not built for silence. She leaned forward slightly, calm, unshaken, eyes locked on her opponent. And in that moment, the temperature in the room shifted. The audience didn't know it yet. They were seconds away from witnessing a clapback that would echo far beyond those four walls. Because what Crockett was about to say would not just defend her career, it would turn the tables on Clinton himself. And when it landed, it would leave him with something he hadn't felt in years: regret. Asterisk the moment Clinton's remark echoed into silence. The confrontation became more than a spat between two politicians. It became a mirror held up to America itself. This was never just about Crockett's resume. It was about the war for legitimacy. Who gets to define leadership in the 21st century? Who gets to decide whose story matters? For 3 decades, Bill Clinton had been a towering figure in Democratic politics. He was the survivor, the strategist, the embodiment of the political insider's playbook. To his admirers, he was the great communicator, the man who could feel your pain and still convince you to vote for him. To his critics, he was the embodiment of smooth-talking arrogance, a man who could belittle you with charm and make it sting even more because of the smile behind it. And there he was, putting all of that weight, all of that history, behind. A single offhand dismissal of Jasmine Crockett. It wasn't policy that night, it was power, it was hierarchy. It was the old lion roaring just to remind the pride that he was still in the jungle. But what Clinton misjudged was the audience he was speaking to. America had changed. The country that once revered his every word was now divided, skeptical, and impatient with the condescension of establishment figures. Crockett wasn't just another politician trying to climb the ladder. She was a symbol of a new generation demanding its place at the table, not as guests, but as equals. Her rise had been fast, fueled by fire, authenticity, and unapologetic truth-telling. She spoke in a voice that didn't sound like it had been rehearsed in some consulting firm's boardroom. She sounded like the communities she came from, sharp, unfiltered, and deeply human. And that authenticity terrified the establishment, because if people like Crockett could win, the gatekeepers would no longer be needed. So Clinton's jab wasn't just about her legal career. It was about defending an order where voices like his still reigned supreme. If he could belittle her, he could remind everyone watching that the hierarchy was intact. That experience still trumped grit. That his legacy still carried more weight than her reality. But the irony was sharp. In trying to diminish her, he only magnified her. Every insult was a stage light, and the room was watching closely. Viewers online would soon dissect every word, every pause, every flicker of emotion on her face. Would she take the insult in silence, like so many had before her? Or would she flip the script? The tension in that room was not just about politics. It was generational. It was cultural. It was deeply personal. Because in Clinton's dismissal, countless viewers heard the echoes of every professor who had doubted them, every boss who had overlooked them, every powerful man who had told them, "You don't belong here." And that's why this moment mattered. Because Crockett was not simply responding for herself, she was answering for all of them. Clinton had unleashed the first strike. But what no one yet realized was that he had set the stage for his own undoing. The confrontation had been framed. The lines had been drawn. The audience leaned in with anticipation, because what would happen next was not just a rebuttal. It was the spark that would ignite a battle for dignity, identity, and the very meaning of leadership in modern America. And the person who was about to deliver that spark, she wasn't supposed to win this fight. But that's exactly why she did. Bill Clinton's story has always been one of contradictions. To some, he was the boy from Hope, Arkansas, who rose from modest beginnings to the highest office in the land. To others, he was the embodiment of ambition unchecked, a man whose charm could win a room even as his decisions split the country in two. He was the master of survival, the comeback king. For decades, he carried himself like a figure who could not be challenged. His presidency, though often remembered for economic prosperity and global influence, was also marked by scandals that revealed a pattern. The ability to diminish others while maintaining his own glow. He could apologize without conceding, pivot without shame, and turn criticism into applause. That was his gift. But woven into that gift was something else, a habit of looking down on those who hadn't yet earned their place in his carefully curated pantheon of legitimacy. It wasn't that Clinton didn't respect intelligence or talent. He did. But he respected it most when it served him, when it validated his position at the top. When it came from someone new, unpolished, or unwilling to play by his rules. He turned condescension into a weapon. This wasn't the first time he'd deployed. Reporters had felt it. Younger politicians had felt it. Even allies in his own party had tasted the sting of Clinton's carefully veiled put-downs. He wielded his experience like a shield, his folksy charm like camouflage. He could dress up arrogance in a smile, and too often, people laughed along because it felt easier than challenging him. But times had changed. The Democratic Party was no longer a house he alone could command. The old playbook, charm, belittle. Recover didn't resonate with a generation that had grown up tired of being dismissed. Clinton's style, once magnetic, now risked being seen as outdated at best, toxic at worst. And nowhere was that clearer than in his exchange with Jasmine Crockett. He had looked at her and seen not an equal, but a target. Someone young enough, fiery enough, outsider enough, so that he could diminish her with a flick of his tongue and expect the room to nod along. Perhaps he thought it would be a teaching moment, the elder statesman reminding the newcomer of the hierarchy. Perhaps he thought the smirk would soften the blow. But in reality, it only magnified the arrogance that had shadowed his career. Because Clinton's legacy has always been twofold. He was the president who presided over booming markets and global prestige. But he was also the man whose missteps fueled distrust in institutions, whose scandals left wounds that never fully healed, whose ability to survive often came at the expense of others. That contradiction was his hallmark. And that contradiction was on full display in the moment he tried to dismiss Jasmine Crockett's career. What he failed to realize was that he wasn't just speaking as Bill Clinton the man. He was speaking as Bill Clinton, the symbol of power entrenched, of establishment arrogance, of the insider class that believed it could decide who belonged and who didn't. Every word he spoke was heavy with the weight of that legacy. And, for the first time in a long time, that legacy was about to be tested in real time, because across from him sat a woman who had not been shaped by his approval, who had not built her career on his blessing, who had not waited for permission to speak. She carried with her the grit of courtrooms and the voices of communities who had long been left outside the halls of power. She represented not just a new politician, but a new era, and that meant Clinton's old tactics wouldn't work. For decades, he had played kingmaker, deciding who rose and who stayed in the shadows. But that night, in that moment, the crown weighed heavier than ever. The smirk, the remark, the dismissal, they weren't the moves of a king. They were the defenses of someone who felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, and the person shifting. Few saw her rise coming. Those who did knew this was only the beginning. Jasmine Crockett's journey was not scripted in the backrooms of Washington. It began far from the marble halls of Congress, in classrooms and neighborhoods where ambition was not handed out, but forged in struggle. Her path into law was not the polished trajectory of the privileged. It was the grind of someone who had to prove at every step that she deserved to be in the room. Her decision to pursue law was born from a conviction that justice should not be a luxury. In a world where working-class families often face the full weight of the system with no advocate by their side, Crockett stepped into courtrooms as both shield and sword. She fought for those who had been told their voices didn't matter. She fought cases that others deemed unwinnable. Every time she walked into a courtroom, she carried with her not just legal briefs, but lived experience. It was in those battles that she developed the composure that would later define her. Political presence. Opposing counsel would underestimate her. Judges would question her. But Crockett knew the rules of the courtroom were not written for her. They were written to exclude people like her. And so she learned to turn underestimation into an advantage. She let her opponents dismiss her, and then she dismantled them with precision. That grit followed her into politics. When she entered the public arena, she was not polished in the way consultants preferred. She was raw. She was fiery. She spoke without rehearsed sound bites because her truth didn't need scripting, and that authenticity resonated. People didn't just hear her words, they felt her conviction. Her rise was not without obstacles. Critics painted her as too loud, too brash, too unpolished. But Crockett understood something essential. Those labels were simply the establishment's way of telling her she didn't fit their mold, and she had no intention of fitting it. She was not there to inherit the old system. She was there to redefine it. In her community, Crockett was more than a politician. She was a neighbor, a daughter, a fighter whose life was interwoven with the struggles of the people she represented. She walked into rooms not as an elite who had ascended above her roots, but as someone who carried those roots with pride. Every debate, every vote, every fiery speech, they were extensions of the same fights she had waged in courtrooms. Battles for dignity, fairness, and belonging. It was this background that made her confrontation with Clinton so powerful. Because when he tried to dismiss her legal career, he wasn't just dismissing a resume. He was dismissing the years she had spent defending those who had no defender. He was dismissing the late nights, the stacked odds, the relentless determination to stand where others told her she could not, and Crockett knew better than anyone that the courtroom teaches lessons politicians often forget. Stay calm under fire. Let your opponent talk themselves into a corner and then strike with clarity and force. She had learned how to absorb the arrogance of power and turn it into her advantage. That night, she wasn't just a congresswoman facing a former president. She was the same lawyer who had once stood before skeptical judges, who had cross-examined witnesses determined to discredit her, who had fought to make her presence undeniable. And Clinton's smirk? It was just another version of the dismissals. She had heard her entire life. The difference was that now the world was watching. And this time, the dismissal would not end in silence, because Crockett's courtroom grit was about to resurface. And when it did, it would not just answer Clinton. It would redefine the fight itself. Asterisk, the air was electric. Clinton's words had landed like a slap, and Crockett's silence hung like a blade waiting to drop. The audience didn't know which way it would cut. Some leaned forward, anticipating a retort. Others held their breath, unsure if she would. Challenge the man whose reputation still carried weight. Clinton, sensing the tension, leaned back in his chair, that trademark grin spreading across his face. It was the grin of someone who believed he still owned the room. He spoke again, layering his condescension with a feigned familiarity, as if he were the wise mentor and she the overeager student. The chuckles from a few corners of the room told. He still had an audience. But not everyone was laughing. Some shifted uncomfortably, watching Crockett's steady composure. She hadn't flinched. Her eyes remained locked, her expression calm, unshaken. Clinton's voice grew louder, his words sharper, as though trying to provoke a reaction. He mistook her silence for weakness. The murmurs in the crowd grew. This was no longer a passing moment. It was a showdown. Generational tension crackled in the air, every pause carrying more weight than the last. Clinton pressed harder, turning his dismissal into a performance, gesturing broadly, layering charm over insult. And yet Crockett didn't rise to his bait. She let him talk. She let him grin. She let him believe he had control of the moment. The silence she held was not weakness. It was calculation, because while Clinton thought he was tightening the screws, Crockett was sharpening her blade. When he leaned back finally, satisfied with his display, the room felt split in two. Some expected Crockett to fold, to respond with timid deference. Others, especially those who knew her fire, knew something bigger was coming, and they were right. Because Crockett's next move would not just answer his insult. It would dismantle it. When Clinton reclined in his chair with that grin, the grin that had survived scandals, elections, and decades of power, the room thought they had seen this play before. The old guard would win, the newcomer would fade, and history would repeat itself. Asterisk for a heartbeat, the room felt suspended in time. Clinton's grin lingered, his shoulders relaxed, as though he had already claimed the victory. He leaned back with the comfort of a man who had seen countless debates and believed he still owned the stage. But across from him, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, the slightest shift in her posture electrifying the silence. Her voice came low at first. Steady, deliberate. "You know, Mr. President," she began, "I spent my career defending people who didn't have the luxury of charm, or legacy, or powerful friends to smooth the path for them." The words sliced through the air with calm precision, not shouted but delivered with the gravity of someone who had nothing left to prove. The room stilled, heads turning. Clinton's grin faltered just slightly as she continued. "I didn't inherit influence. I didn't come into courtrooms where people assumed I belonged. Every case one argued, every client I defended, I had to fight not just the facts, but the assumptions stacked against me. And maybe that's why I don't measure careers by who sits in the highest office. I measure them by who stands up when no one else will." The audience erupted in murmurs. A few claps broke out, tentative at first, then growing. Crockett raised a hand gently, as if to call the room back to silence, and it obeyed. She pressed on. "You talk about my legal career like it was some footnote. But let me remind you, when people in my community were being written off, when their voices were drowned out, I was the one standing between them and a system designed to crush them. That may not mean much to those who think power is measured in titles, but to the people who had no one else, it meant everything." Clinton shifted in his seat, his smirk now stiff. Crockett's cadence sharpened. She began to weave her courtroom experience into a broader indictment, not just of his words, but of the system he represented. "You see, Mr. President, dismissing my work doesn't diminish me. It diminishes every young lawyer who dares to take on impossible cases, every immigrant who believes they too can rise, every woman who is told her resume will never be enough. And maybe that's why your words matter more than you realize, because they remind us that the old guard would rather mock than make room." The crowd gasped. This was no rebuttal. This was a dismantling. Crockett paused, let the silence breathe, then delivered the line that would be replayed 1,000,000 times. "Across social media, I didn't come here to be measured by your standards. I came here to set new ones." The eruption was instantaneous. Applause thundered through the room, phones shot into the air. Hashtags were born in real time. Clinton's face tightened, the smirk erased, his eyes darting briefly downward as if searching for ground that no longer existed beneath him. But Crockett wasn't finished. She leaned in even closer, her voice now carrying the weight of every courtroom battle she had ever fought. "History has a funny way of remembering moments like this, because people forget the smirk, they forget the insult, but they never forget when the underestimated rise and remind the world who they really are. The room roared again, chants beginning to ripple. Clinton attempted a small laugh, but it fell flat, swallowed by the sound of a crowd that had already chosen its victor. Crockett closed with a tone not of arrogance, but of dignity. So if the measure of a career is who you lift up along the way, then I'll let the people I've fought for speak for me. And I'll leave it to history to decide who truly served and who simply survived. The words landed like a gavel striking wood. Final, irrefutable. Clinton sat back, visibly diminished, his once commanding presence overshadowed by the younger, a woman who had turned his dismissal into a declaration of strength. The old lion had roared, but the pride was already listening to a new voice, and outside those walls, the ripple effect had only just begun. The clip hit the internet before Clinton had even left his seat. Within minutes, Twitter, or X, as some now called it, exploded with hashtags like hashtag Crockett Clapback and hashtag smirk erased. TikTok filled with quick edits, looping the exact moment his grin melted away, set to triumphant music. Memes spread like wildfire. Side by side, images of Clinton's smirk and his stunned silence, captioned with phrases like, "When you underestimate, the wrong one." Commentators scrambled to keep up. Progressive voices hailed the exchange as a generational torch passing, the moment the old establishment was forced to reckon with the new wave. Late-night comedians built their monologues around it, replaying Crockett's mic drop line with added laugh tracks and applause. Even celebrities who rarely waded into politics tweeted their admiration. Jasmine Crockett just schooled Bill Clinton on live TV, respect. But not everyone was celebrating. Clinton loyalists rushed to defend him, dismissing the clash as a misunderstanding, urging restraint and piling on the former president. Yet even in their defenses, the damage was clear. Clinton looked rattled, and Crockett looked unstoppable. More importantly, the broader public felt the moment on a visceral level. For countless viewers, Crockett's clapback wasn't just about her. It was about them. It was about every time they'd been belittled. In a classroom, talked over in a meeting, dismissed in an interview, Crockett's calm dismantling became a symbol of what it feels like to finally, powerfully, say enough. Social media wasn't the only place the shockwaves rippled. Cable news panels dissected the exchange frame by frame. Analysts debated whether Clinton had revealed the weakness of the establishment in a single smirk, whether Crockett had cemented herself as a rising star destined for greater things. One conservative pundit sneered that she was too emotional, but the clip of him saying it only fueled more support, with Crockett's allies turning it into yet another viral soundbite. The symbolism was undeniable. Clinton had once been the youthful outsider who challenged the old order. Now he looked like the very thing he had once fought against, the dismissive insider, out of touch with the hunger for authenticity and dignity. Crockett, by contrast, became the face of resilience. Her words echoed beyond politics into culture, turning into slogans on t-shirts, captions under Instagram posts, and rallying cries at community meetings. It wasn't just a moment. It was a movement. But beneath the memes and hashtags, something deeper was happening. People weren't just laughing at Clinton's stumble. They were rallying behind Crockett's strength. They were recognizing her as more than a congresswoman, more than a debater. She had become a symbol of grit over glamour, of authenticity over polish, of dignity over dismissal. And as the echo chamber amplified her words, the question began to form. Was this simply a viral moment, or was it the beginning of a legacy? When asked about the moment days later, Crockett didn't frame it as a personal victory. She reframed it as something larger, something universal. It was never about me versus him, she said. It was about respect. Respect for every woman who has been told she's too much. Respect for every lawyer who has been told their work doesn't count. Respect for every person who has ever been underestimated because they didn't fit someone else's definition of power. Her words resonated because they tapped into something timeless. The clash had begun as a dismissal, but she transformed it into a declaration. Dignity matters more than legacy. Truth carries further than arrogance. Service outlasts spectacle. Clinton's remark was meant to diminish, but it had only elevated. It reminded people that even the most entrenched figures can be challenged, and that history does not belong exclusively to those who have already written it. The moral was not about humiliating an opponent. It was about standing firm in identity and refusing to yield to arrogance. Crockett's calm composure under fire became a lesson in resilience. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to mimic the establishment to dismantle it. You simply have to know who you are and refuse to let anyone take that from you. The symbolism was powerful. Clinton, once the face of generational change, now represented the arrogance of those who cling to power. Crockett, underestimated and dismissed, became the vessel for a new torch, one lit not by privilege but by persistence. And when she spoke of respect, it wasn't just for herself. It was for everyone who had ever felt the sting of dismissal, everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The clash ended with a moral clarity. Rare in politics, dignity will always outlast arrogance. And in that instant, the torch of leadership passed not by ceremony, but by courage. Bill Clinton thought he was putting Jasmine Crockett in her place. Instead, he handed her a platform to define her place in history. His smirk, his dismissal, his condescension, all of it became fuel for a clapback that turned into a cultural moment. And Crockett, with calm precision, showed that the underestimated can rise not just to meet the challenge, but to eclipse it. For viewers, it wasn't just entertainment, it was validation. It was the reminder that arrogance crumbles when confronted with authenticity, that dignity can silence even the most practiced voices of dismissal. It was the kind of moment people share, not because it's political, but because it's personal. Everyone who has been underestimated felt the victory as their own. And that's why this story matters beyond one debate, beyond one room, beyond one viral clip. Because every smirk you've endured, every dismissal you've carried, every time you were told you didn't belong, Jasmine Crockett's answer was yours too. If you believe in dignity over arrogance, in grit over entitlement, in truth over performance, then share this story. Tell it. Pass it on. Because moments like this remind us who we are and who we refuse to let anyone tell us we're not.